Okay, thank you all for coming. It's a beautiful spring day. We made it through winter, another Michigan winter, and we've got a couple excellent speakers to start us off this morning. Mary Hill and Kyle Kerbawy from the University Medical Center are going to present on the Enterprise Analytics Roadmap. Then we'll have a little break, and we're going to have someone from CSCAR, Corey Powell, come in. And at the end, we'll have some wrap-up on future meetings, training sessions, and whatnot. So, Mary?
As Carolyn said, I'm Mary Hill, and I'm Director of Data Management Services at the medical school. And what I want to start with is really a couple definitions. You've seen our name has changed to Compass because the Enterprise Analytics Roadmap is done. We've created the roadmap, and now it's being considered by our leadership. And we've rebranded ourselves as Compass, which is the Comprehensive Analytics Services and Support for the health system. For analytics definition, we're using a very broad definition. It's any secondary use of data is we're considering in our umbrella of analytics. The health system itself is an actual organizational unit, and it consists of the hospital and the medical school. Nursing school, the health science schools like the School of Pharmacy are all outside of the health system. They're not part of that umbrella. And so when we looked at this roadmap, we really focused on the hospital and medical school, though the nursing school was very active, as well as some of the other schools, in helping us come up with our plan. The other thing is I have a slide deck, has a lot of slides in it, and that's because we sort of wanted to really give you a good idea of what we were doing, so I'll be clicking through a lot of the slides quickly because we can certainly share this presentation. There's nothing secret in this presentation. The other thing is I want to talk about what were the catalysts for doing this Enterprise Analytics Roadmap, and there were a couple catalysts. One, the med school decided to take what we used to have as what we called the Application and Information Services Group and split it into Software Development and Data Management Services, and I took over the Data Management Services part. We decided to hire an Enterprise Data Architect and hired Kyle into his position. And the real catalyst was when the Chief Medical Information Officer, Dr. Andrew Rosenberg, who was also an anesthesiologist, decided to take on the director position for information and data management at the hospital. And so we met, because we're kind of counterparts, and started talking about, and of course with the large role that he has at the hospital, he had all kinds of people coming to his door and saying, you have to help us solve some problems. And the other thing is he came to me and said, people are telling me I shouldn't call the health system data warehouse the health system data warehouse. And I said, well, that's because if you look at the institutional conceptual data model, and there's 12 domain slices around the master data, only one of those data slices is patient care, and that's the data that you have in your health system data warehouse. You don't have all of that other information. Hence, we got a small group together and decided to look at what would we do. We came up with about 40 projects and kind of looked at what the cost. It was kind of high, and decided we should take a more formal approach and engage an outside external contractor to help us. Well, Deloitte happened to already be there, had been helping with the MyChart initiative, which is the electronic patient medical record system at the hospital. And so they were pretty familiar with what some of the hospital needs were, so we engaged them as really an extension to the MyChart contract. They'd also been helping with some of the reporting initiatives. So, they came in with already having some information, which helped make this be a much more timely roadmap. This was officially kicked off on August 4th in 2014. We had gone to the EVPMA, which is the leadership group that's over the hospital and the medical school, and requested $1.8 million, most of which went to Deloitte, of course. The rest went to some food for faculty meetings, that kind of thing, and created a plan and executed on it, and finished and gave our summit presentation at the end of January. All right, so was there a problem at the health system? And at the medical school and at the hospital, the amount of data that you're probably all very familiar with these problems. We produce a ton of data. It comes in multiple places, multiple formats, multiple ways, and is managed by multiple individuals and groups. We have no common enterprise-wide data standards that are in use at the health system, and there's no single place to go to get help with managing data. So why is this a problem? Well, it creates a lot of confusion and conflict. People don't know where to go to get their information. Conflict comes from when two reports go out. For example, we had a report go out from the hospital with the number of patients with cancer, which had a significant different number than the Cancer Center's report on the number of patients with cancer. Both reports probably correct, but the definition of what they used was, nowhere that people could really tell and to determine, what was accurate or what number they really wanted to use. Detracts from our core mission. If our faculty who are supposed to be doing research are spending all of their time trying to track down data, trying to transform it, they can't be doing what they're really supposed to be doing, which is, research and making discoveries. Results in missed opportunities. We had an internationally known faculty researcher come here, Matthias Kretzler. He said it took him 4 years to get productive here at the University of Michigan. What would have happened if he'd been productive in 2 years? What other grant opportunities might he have been able to get? And it's expensive because the med school and the hospital pay for the same thing over and over and over again. Because somebody, some researcher might have a great idea, or a clinician or some enterprise group, and they go to their leadership and say, hey, I got this great idea, it's going to cost this much money. The leadership doesn't have any idea of really what's going on across the enterprise. And so, they invest in all of these different initiatives, which often have duplicative efforts in it. So as I said, tons of data coming through. It's exponentially growing, and the types of data are exponentially growing. So a lot more unstructured data. We're getting images, waveform data, that kind of thing that we need to pay attention to, social media data, et cetera. The technology is changing. So we have a lot of faculty who want to use graph and spatial databases or NoSQL databases, Hadoop. What we used to provide is no longer sufficient. Our competitors are very active in this space. We can look in the press every day and find examples of where our competitors are actually trying to address these issues. University of Pittsburgh invested $125 million in their analytics effort, for example. And they're getting value. They're getting millions of dollars back in their investments. So what can we do? One is we said we have to get leadership support for this effort. It can't be something that IT is going to do. This has to be owned by the business. Very much helped that Dr. Rosenberg was part of this effort because he's part of the business also. But we got at that time the interim EVPMA to support our efforts. The dean of the medical school and the head of our operations all were in support of this effort. We've had lots and lots of engagements over the past years, but they've always been focused on one area. They'd be focused on, for example, the first one, SACRA, was a strategic assessment of the clinical research enterprise that was really focused on how do we improve the administration efforts that are occurring. It actually created some of the investments that occurred in e-research. Recombinant was bringing up a database with a data model that allows you to share I2B2 to share with other institutions. The UMHS IT strategy was looking at more of what's some of the technology we might want to do. 5AM came in and helped us create a research strategy around how we want to improve research. Epic was Epic coming in and trying to help us how we could improve analytics with the MyChart data, for example. All of those were they were successful. They all had good things that came out of it, but they were all very individualized, siloed efforts. And so when we started this plan, we said this is going to be across all of our missions. And at the health system, we have the administrative mission, which is we have to run as a business, we have to make money. Patient care is one of our missions. Research and discovery is one of our missions, and education is one of our missions, not only for medical school students, but we have graduate students, we have residents, and we have to provide continuing medical education to all of our care providers. And one of the things that we've used to demonstrate to leadership what some of the problems are is that we have lots of great initiatives come forward. So for example, we right now have a group called MSIS, which is looking at the critical care infrastructure, and they're starting a project around acute hemodynamics, something or other, and it's all about predicting when a patient is going to crash before they crash. There's certain things that you can do if you're looking at their blood pressure and you're looking at their, their waveform data that's coming off and their electronic medical record data. You can predict when somebody's going to crash, and therefore you can get in and make modifications to their care before they crash. It's a big data initiative. It's taking all these disparate pieces of data, and waveform data is huge. They needed data from our research data warehouse, but then they found, well, that they didn't have all the data that they needed. So then they had to reach out to our health system data warehouse. And then our health system data warehouse is actually also feeding our quality initiatives, both inpatient and outpatient. We have lots of registries where individual faculty are collecting more detailed information around their subjects. PCORI is a project where we are, it's a federated query program across the national landscape where you can put out a query and it will go out to the institutions who are participating and return the number of patients who have certain chronic diseases. Neptune is Matthias Kretzler, his chronic disease, where they're looking at genomes and how they impact chronic disease, and PROMIS is the actual patient reported outcomes that they are tracking. We have Transmart, which is another way to be tracking patient data for example, they're looking at, so if somebody has bipolar disease, the type of drug that they give them the first time makes a huge difference. And so they want to make sure they target the right drug to the right patient. My OncoSeek is actually our Arul Shanayan runs a lab where they're trying to look at personalized therapy for cancer, so looking at your sequences and designing the cancer treatment based on what your sequences are. And all of these things are going on. They're all pulling data from my charts. They're all doing different things. But we've actually sort of combined them into what kinds of initiatives need to occur. At one point, we have a lot of, in Domain 1, it's a lot about our enterprise data assets that we have. Domain 2, it's more about big data, real-time decision support, so we're partnering with vendors to do a lot of that work, which is different than the Domain 3, which is if I'm participating on some of these national initiatives, you have to use all free kind of open source tools, you have to adhere to a common data model, and those take a different kind of tool sets than the other two. And now we have this new personalized health initiative that's starting to pop up. And what we want to say is if we provide a platform, we'll be able to really tie these initiatives together and provide better support and services to the faculty, staff, and students that are using our data. So our vision is a flexible, easy-to-use system of standards-based tools and data that provides a uniform, consistent, results-oriented experience for faculty, staff, and students. And why do we want to do this? We want to be able to increase collaboration, inform decision-making, and drive better planning, enable more cost-effective administration, and by doing that, we'll actually enable innovation. So what does this look like for somebody? They would be able to ask questions in all of these different areas, and they would be able to get their answers by using this system of standard-based tools and data. So we have a vision. Our 2020 vision is, and this actually came from our our Senior Associate Dean for Clinical Affairs and for the faculty group practice. This is really his vision. It was that we can take any kind of data from all these different sources and put it into an information management and information governance zone and that it can be output to answer all the different kinds of questions and to provide data for the new types of applications that will be coming out. And we'll be doing that. We need to pay attention to the system, security, and storage. You know, we could be using data that's on-premise, could be in the cloud, or it could be, you know, software as a service type information. We want to take an enterprise approach because, as I said, there's all kinds of duplication that's going on. And you don't immediately get your results, but, you know, as you work through this, we'll get more and more improved results. We want to look at what's called the T1 through T4 initiative, which is T1 is where your basic scientists are looking at cells and what's happening with those, which turns into translational, where you're taking what you've learned about the cells and trying to apply it to patients, which then turns into clinical research, which then turns into good policy, which turns into practice, and we start the whole process again. So if you hear about the Learning Health Science Initiative, that's what it's about. It's about taking T1 all the way through to T3, and then T4 is actually putting it into practice and doing a circular approach. We're also going to take a very much federated approach. We know we can't just put one solution into place and have it work for everybody. We know that there are certain things that we can provide as shared services at the hub that will enable our more spoke-specific data in the different areas. And we have to understand that there's increasing complexity with our data, and that, you know, more and more people want to access and share data and be able to query and, you know, come up with new discoveries. So how did we go about this? I'm going to turn it over to Kyle.
Hi, everybody. I'm Kyle Kerbawy. I'm the Enterprise Data Architect for the medical school. Good to see you. We're kind of going through this really fast, so I want to pause. And are there any questions at this point, or any particular points that you'd care to go into any further? Anyone here? Yeah.
I do have a question about scope.
Sure.
Hold on one second.
I'm sorry. Oh, sorry. I do have a question about scope. Are you focusing mainly on patient care and research data, or are you including operational data within the?
So that's the scope that we're taking here is fairly expansive. We're trying to not take a siloed approach, but to take a fairly holistic sort of enterprise approach, at least across the health system. The entirety of the missions is being considered. A lot of our previous efforts have focused on specific sort of missions. You know, Mary talked through the strategic effort around clinical research, for example, the SACRA initiative. The most recent 5 a.m. engagement sort of centered on the research data strategy. So the intent here is to focus across the institution and all the missions, which including operations. And, you know, there's a lot of efficiencies and good work that can be sort of done in the operations and administrative area that we want to be sure to focus on. Absolutely. Yeah.
My question was about the delivery of the analytic insights to the community. If there was any specific, in the common set of tools or frameworks that you guys were looking at, what the vision was for an end user to consume the visualizations and the output.
Yeah, so that's of course where the rubber kind of hits the road. If you don't have good presentation mechanisms and good ways of delivering content in ways that the user can understand, you know, a lot of your work can be for naught. There is a very presentation-oriented emphasis on what we're doing. You know, we're looking to consolidate existing resources and existing tool sets, things that are in use within the community right now. But of course, we understand that the community is very diverse, and there's a whole distinct set of needs around presentation that we have to remain flexible around. So that is a focus, and we are looking to make the experience valuable for the end user community.
Yeah, and I want to give an example of a use case that gets directly to that. I was sitting with Sean Dwyer, who is, you know, one of the administrative directors for the operations at the hospital, and I was kind of going through the roadmap with her so she would be familiar with it. And she got a call from St. Joe's that said, "We have too many patients with flu, and we want to send some of these patients over to you at the hospital." So what does she do? She goes to her email and she's calling me, well, I know I have a report here somewhere that says how many beds are available. Let me just look, not easy at all. I mean, it took her about 5 to 10 minutes to actually find this report so she could say, oh, yeah, you can send some patients over. I mentioned this use case to our CFO as an example of why we should have dashboards that people can easily get to get that kind of information. And he goes, well, if I was her, I would have just said send them over. But then that goes against because of course he's looking at the dollars, but somebody said, well, that wouldn't be good though if they're sitting there and they're in a hallway somewhere. So it is really that we have to try to take into account all of these factors.
Yeah. Any other questions at this point? All right. So how did we go about doing this? That's we purposefully sort of set a very short timeline to put together a roadmap. It was around 6 months, give or take a little bit. And we did meet that timeline. There was 3 basic work stream areas. The first is in enterprise information management, which involved the organization of enterprise information management governance and the governance organization. The second work stream was the analytics architecture requirements and roadmap, which we'll get into some more details on later. And then there's an overall analytics program management work stream. So that's the short version of the work that took place over that 6-month period. Important thing, as we sort of went into a little bit earlier, is that this is everyone's roadmap, for the health system. The groups that were reached out to were expansive. There's a lot of constituents within the health system that we needed to reach out and touch base with and come to understand their requirements for analytics. I mean, the tricky part with enterprise analytics is that there are so many areas of data and content leveraging that are important to the institution. And the important aspect of organizing all that is really getting to understand and getting everybody's involvement and requirements understood for the use of data and content. So, you can see this list of departments, centers and institutes, organizations, lots of stakeholders in the enterprise analytics effort. The organization of the enterprise analytics roadmap centered around 9 use cases. These are sort of taken as an effort to kind of come to understand the types of work that leverage data and content on the analytics landscape. And so these 9 use cases are sort of mega categories or large-scale scenarios that were organized around. And real briefly, there were 4 clinically oriented use cases, there are 4 research-oriented use cases, and there's 1 education-oriented use case, generally. There are, of course, crossovers between those things, for sure. Mary went into this a little bit earlier, but the way that we sort of identified the domains of analytics within the health system was, the overarching domain, the domain number 1, sort of has to do with our enterprise data assets as a set, and then, their integration, the reporting analytics, and the governance of those things. So it's kind of like the overarching domain of analytics. And then basically the subdomains were domain number 2, centered around real-time decision support, including the MSIS efforts that are underway. An effort to be able to leverage analytics in real time. It's a very kind of specific use case and requires specific tooling and competencies, basically. And then the domain number 3, the open analytics ecosystems, is kind of the open research use case, leveraging open source tools and low cost of entry and robust collaboration across institutions. And that represents a whole bunch of work that sort of happens here at the university. So it's also a particular thing to focus on. So the diagram that you see on the right of this is the kind of summary of the vision for this. Basically, you see the data governance kind of holds the center of all this, right? The important aspect of data governance is that we understand what we're doing as an institution, have a strategy that is being executed on and agreed to, essentially. So it's sort of the center of making all of these things happen. And that's, then around the data governance piece, you see those domains that we just sort of talked through. and then the 9 analytics use cases form the basis around that. The design principles that you can see on the left, analytics architecture is based on actual user requirements and real-world practice. Analytics capabilities and architecture will be aligned with federated governance practices, and then common tool set supported by prepackaged analytics and standards minimize the time to value. So our roadmap journey, kind of the high-level flow of it, progress from where we're going and then to how we will get there and how we will manage, basically. And we're going to get into the sort of enabling pillars of what the details of the roadmap work in the successive slides, which include these deliverables, first of which were the use case profiles. There's a very lengthy and expansive document that sort of fleshed out those 9 analytics use cases into details, basically. And, you know, it was an attempt to get a high-level view of the requirements across the health system enterprise and capture those requirements at a high level. You can see the format that some of these profiles went into with the end user details, the data requirements, constraints, known issues, and assumptions. High-level functional requirements that were derived from the use case profiles. There's a list of 150, I believe, somewhere in that range. And then it was an interesting thing to sort of lay these requirements out against each of the 9 analytics use cases and sort of see where there was a crossover between those two. That sort of showed how intertwined all these things do tend to be, and which, you know, is some of the complexity about this thing. Technical architecture. Before the engagement, we sort of looked at what the current state of the UMHS technical analytics architecture has been. And, you know, you'll see these kinds of summary slides. You know, if you try to put the whole enterprise and its analytics onto one page, this is what you kind of wind up having more times than not. Starting with sort of your data sources on the left-hand side, moving through to standardization and integration, basically in that second column, data storage in the third column, and then the access analysis and delivery layer, or I kind of like to think of it as sort of the presentation layer, basically on the far right. So you can kind of see what we had at the beginning of all this within these 4 columns, and then that kind of translates into the future enabled state, which is the same sort of view, but fleshed out with our current requirements and what we would seek to accomplish with the compass in the future. Same kind of layout, but a lot more detail and a lot more services and support, basically, around the analytics. There's a lot of stuff here. I won't take the time to go through it, but at any point in the future, if you want to talk through any details on this, we'd really be happy to chat through them in more detail. And like Mary said, you know, this presentation is available for dissemination and analysis to your heart's content. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Beg your pardon? Oh yeah. So for the folks watching at home, HIPAA is envisioned as or was brought up as a roadblock for access and analysis, and it is. It is absolutely requires the most careful planning and compliance and security measures, essentially, to ensure that data stays within the right hands, and that's. Well, so that's a big emphasis for analytics purposes, is what de-identification, right? There's for certain analyses, we do our best, you know, where possible, basically, to take the. I'm sorry, and to repeat that, the question. Can you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
How do you de-identify someone, but then you want to still track them? I guess you
Right.
put in another hash code, kind of a
Yeah,
marker for
there's
that
there's a whole
person?
set of technology and capabilities that we're looking to spin up to make that sort of an enterprise service, basically the de-identification. And right now, that gets left mostly to the projects or the analyses to do. But that is something that we understand should be kind of an enterprise guided thing, essentially, because there's
It's actually very complicated. There's like 18 elements that have to be scrubbed in it. Even things like you can't. So, for example, if somebody's surgery occurred in August, they have to kind of scrub that because if if it was something that was fairly unique and you knew somebody who had that surgery in August, you might be able to figure out who that person was. But then that complicates some of the research because if they're actually looking at what's the impact of the seasons on somebody's disease or something that's happening to them, they have to be careful to move kind of everything. So it is actually a complex thing, and it's not done. That's why there isn't one big de-identified database right now because it's actually very hard to do that. It's more done on a certain initiative basis.
yeah.
About how long did it take to develop the requirements and use cases?
There's a lot of work that was done around the requirements and use cases. A lot of interviews and drafting, and redrafting, and rewriting. That was a big chunk of the work that was done during the road mapping exercise. And I would say from a length of time perspective, it took around
It was like
3
3 months. Yeah, we interviewed about 200 people. And we used several different approaches. One was we had already started doing research use case interviews. One of our faculty members was actually doing that, handling that. And so we sort of piggybacked on that. And then we added in interviews for all of the other missions. And we did both individual interviews, some of which people requested that we keep anonymous, so we can't just release who all we interviewed. We also did group interviews. So, for example, for the Cancer Center, we had a couple what we called work group sessions where, at noon we had food. People could just come up and give us information, as well as then going to, like, for example, a faculty meeting and gathering information. So we had a lot of different ways to collect that information.
Yeah.
Do you have some sort of feedback or kind of loop mechanism in place, once it is implemented to make sure that if there is sort of a repeated pattern, because I do see data mining up there and analytics, though, to see if there could be some things which could be predicted, and not necessarily hypothesizing, really, more or less, though.
So I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Something to do more with data mining and, analytics, and how you could go ahead and have some sort of a feedback mechanism in place, though, to predict trends, really.
Yes. So those are the kinds of analytics, certainly, that we're looking to support, right? And then the intent is to then refactor the findings from data mining into the processes that generate the data, right? So there is an intent to, that's kind of what the learning health system is effectively supposed to be about. When you make discoveries, how do you put them into practice? And that's a whole range of knowledge and initiatives in their own right. There's a new department in the medical school that's basically focused on getting the findings turned back into practice. So that is an emphasis, yeah.
Yeah, and are you talking about like a researcher doing the data mining, or are you talking about how we will determine if our project is successful? Yeah. So this is a living process. So one of the things is one of the director for research, Terry Grebe, had come to me and said, well, I hope this is the last time we're doing a document like this and doing this process. And I said, no, I hope we continue to do this. This has to be a living document. Right, we do need to determine, are we successful? Are these services that we're putting into place, have they really brought the value? And as you said, it's very tricky to do some of those kinds of things, and I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end.
So from an illustrative perspective, back to the technical architecture, the previous slide was very conceptual, and this slide sort of gets to some of the technologies and solutions that have actually been put into place around some of these capabilities, right? So you see a lot of names of products, partners, and solutions in this particular view on things, which then can be blown out to focus for particular domains. So for example, if you get into the clinical research, the domain number 2, we can use our large-scale diagram to sort of point to where different domains and initiatives actually have needs and requirements and how we're going to meet those needs and support them in the future with the single diagram. We also have an analytic applications heat map. It's a lot to look at, but the thing that the color coding that is in place here is meant to sort of signify if the colors are green for some of these analytic applications, these are things that we're doing and doing well right now. If the color is yellow at this point, then these are things that we're kind of doing. And if it's orange, these are things that we're sort of barely doing, and red are things that we're kind of not doing at all. So you can see from the color coding on these things the sort of gaps that the organization has within the enterprise analytics domain. And the same sort of thing here with the technology systems and tools heat map. Across the top, you can see the data flow architecture, essentially from acquisition to integration, storage, analytical data layer, discovery and analytics, and then information sharing. And then the same kinds of color coding for what's taking place and what is not. This particular diagram, or this, well, I mean, it was.
Started in August and ended in January. Right. Well, we had Deloitte was helping,
Yeah.
and and we did have all those previous reports, so
Right.
we reviewed a lot of those. We had a lot of people participate, so I would,
This
it's
is
not
something
like
that's
everything's
been taking
new.
place for years. Yeah, I wouldn't say that all the work took place in 6
Yeah.
months, but this is a set of capabilities that people have been looking at for a long time. It's just a sort of a summary view on a lot of information that we had or were able to collect. Conceptual data model, we do conceptual data models to kind of understand the data landscape broadly, right? They're sort of at a very high level used for communicative purposes to express ideas around what kind of data we're really sort of talking about. It's a way to sort of take a very complex thing and try to make it more simple and understandable at a high level, essentially. And the subject areas that we sort of focus here within the conceptual data model provide a view on what kinds of data we're looking at. Obviously, within the health system, there is a lot of data. It's a really kind of awesome is the best way to put it. If you like data, yeah. But this is sort of the high-level view of that data picture, basically. The data governance organizational model and playbook. This is kind of the crux of making things happen, I would say. A lot of consideration was put into this, and especially in terms of the kind of culture that we have here at the university and at the health system. It's important to be able to maintain flexibility for people to do the things that they want to do while also moving forward institutional data strategy. And the data governance organization that we're putting together is intended to work both sides of that equation, basically. I could go into the details with this. I'm not sure.
Yeah, we're supposed to be done 11.
It's a lot. But it is here, and this is something that is also of interest across the university because data governance at the health system level needs to work in concert with data governance at the university level, and that's something that we understand very well. So this is something that we'll be iterating on and seeking to improve over time. But without successful data governance and guidance for your information assets, it's very difficult to really make progress on things. And that's the thing that we want to, it's really difficult to make progress on things as an institution. And so that's the emphasis that we're looking to move forward, is some mechanisms to move forward institutional data strategy. Stakeholders view, at the high level, these are the kinds of stakeholders that we're looking at with data governance. It's particularly important when you're setting up a data governance structure to be as specific as possible about who's going to do what. I mean, that's basically what we're really looking to specify as roles and responsibilities. And so this is a sample listing of what data stewards, for example, will do in the data governance roles and responsibilities area. And then some illustrative examples of the kinds of subject areas and potential stewards that we might be looking at for medical data. Again, this is something that is fairly new at the health system level, is the attempt to identify data stewards and have specific roles and responsibilities around those. This is something that isn't quite as new at the university level, but it's an area that we really need to work together on across the functional and technical units to ensure that we have alignment on efforts. Ramp up plan recommendations. This is a sort of a change management view. You want to establish your data governance. Focus on education and why data governance is important and how each of us is a data steward in one way or another. A lot of data governance is really about communication, and this is sort of the emphasis of communication and enriching the framework for successful data management. Once education is done, you prioritize objectives and what we're going to spend our efforts on, because you can't do everything, right? So you have to prioritize. And then sort of expand upon initial successes across the new objectives. There are recommendations for each of the sort of phases that get into play, the activities, the desired outcomes, and the deliverables. And then there's some orientation recommendations for pilot use cases. There's of course an emphasis to deliver value, and value in the analytics sphere can be fairly tricky to quantify and understand. Some of these things we're seeking to do are fairly foundational, and as Mary sort of used the example a few slides ago of the duplicative effort that we're sort of looking to remediate through successful enterprise information management. The pilot use cases, on the other hand, are sort of the quick wins categories, things that we know would deliver a real big bang for the buck immediately and show value to the rest of the organization, and sort of bring everybody along on board for doing this in an enterprise fashion. Data governance playbook gets into the playbook of the data governance. that word just makes me laugh every time I look at it, but it is what it is. It's the playbook for running the team. And then enterprise metadata management is one of the key initiatives that we're looking to move forward. Metadata is basically the information that supports the successful use and leveraging of data and content for the enterprise. So it's a really key enterprise function. We kind of do it in a fairly differentiated manner across all of our domains right now. So we'd really like to focus on enterprise-wide metadata management. Includes master data management, which is, master data is essentially data that is used by multiple processes and domains. So good examples of master data are certainly things around people right now at the university. People are the essence, the knowledge centers of the university, and understanding everything around the people that make the university run is a sort of a master data initiative. There are these initiatives for master data management roadmap and strategy. And then as well with metadata management, we have some early successes that we've gotten going, which includes a dataset catalog. Dataset catalog is an effort to really come to understand all of the different data sets that are available for use at the university, right? So we kind of starting with enterprise data assets. These are the ones that we would like to point to as, supported enterprise-wide assets for different purposes and leveraging. But of course, data sets then get into other things. So they get into research data sets, for example. They get into external data sets. CMS is a big external data set that we're very interested in. And so really it's kind of before we can organize our data assets, we really first have to understand what they are. And the data set catalog is an effort around that. And then the information management glossary, that's kind of a compromise-ish name, but it's an attempt to standardize terminology and what we mean when we say something, right? So the great example that we always love to toss around is student. You know, what do we mean when we say student? There's how many different definitions of student across the enterprise. We would like to come to understand each of those definitions, and while we understand that there are needs for local variances on those things, we want to at least be able to point them out so that when we have things like saying what a cancer patient is, from the earlier example that we had, what are the different definitions of a cancer patient that can lead to these two reports that say different numbers but are purported to mean the same thing, right? All right, and then the roadmap.
So as part of the roadmap, what we basically came up with were a set of I don't know, I think it was around 35 projects with some sub-projects. And we organized them around what were foundational projects versus what would be more use case driven projects. And the foundational projects are around enterprise data governance, putting together a committee, putting together a program management office to manage this roadmap in essence. Organization that's looking at our enterprise analytics organization, and for one, looking at a chief data officer role, looking at what we consider to be data concierge roles, which would be helping people get to the data and tools that they need to get to. And then looking at how we have all these different groups who are doing analytics, and is there a different way that we could organize and better serve the health system. Change management, anytime you start mucking with the organization, you need to have change management. It's pretty important. The technical architecture, or the sort of technical things that we want to do, we want to do a technical assessment and rationalization. So we did go out and kind of look at what the different groups are, but this is real what they're doing and what kind of tools they're using, but it was done at a very high level. We wanted to really get down into the specifics, look at what the licenses are, the contracts, to see if we can actually make some improvements and reduce the number of tools that we have in place. Enterprise Service Bus, which is a name that has a lot of different meanings, but that's basically providing a different way to surface our data to applications or even to feed other data warehouses. Master data management, having better understanding around what we consider our master elements, identifying where the source of that data is and what should be used, and putting some tools into place to help with that. Metadata management is about mapping our data and using data standards. ETL optimization, we know we will never have one enterprise data warehouse. It's just not ever going to make sense. So how is it that we can, though, provide more consistency around all the different data sets / data marts that are going to come out of our initiatives? And one of those is by putting together technology that has a place where you can sort of staging platforms where you can provide that data that then those data marts pull from, instead of everybody going to the source and redoing transformations over and over again. Reference data semantic services, coming to agreement on what, for example, gender means and what the elements that we're going to sort of code everything to. What standards do we want to use? Data quality is really about, how do we ensure that we're providing clean data, and what tools can we put into place to help with that? Natural language processing, which is about looking at our textual data and unstructured data and sort of annotating it. Big data platforms and streaming data platforms to get at monitors, wearable devices, that kind of thing. That's the projects that are really needed to enable the use case driven projects, which is getting into clinical department performance management, having actual quality analytics platforms, population health, service line, which is more like around cancer, cardiovascular center, cardiovascular services, research analytics, cohort exploration discovery, terminology management, data discovery and sharing, clinical trial matching, omics platforms, longitudinal research platforms, registry enhancements, open source toolkits, finance and operations with some projects around finance and revenue cycle management, supply chain, which is, for example, if we might have 10 surgeons who are doing knee replacement surgery, and they each may have their favorite, knee part that they're putting in there. Well, that's not very, that costs the institution money. So it's really coming down to, let's come to some agreement on what knee piece we're going to use, and maybe instead of having 10, we have 2. Enterprise performance management and operations performance management. And then learner analytics, which is really getting towards, how effective is our educational enterprise. And then we have these active ongoing projects that we're sort of participating. MCIRC, which is the real-time data, we're closely entwined with what they're doing. Neptune, one of the reasons we're entwined with them is we're using them because Matthias Kretzler is this great researcher, but he has projects that are being done at, just at a lab level all the way to the international projects. And so what are all the characteristics of the different projects that he does? What are the kinds of support and services that he needs to, if you're going to do just I'm going to be an individual researcher, what do you need to do that versus if I'm going to do this international kind of collaboration project? And so we have one of our researchers will be publishing a research data collaborative maturity matrix so that we can use that. Will be used by the data concierge service. So when a faculty comes to us, we can say, okay, where is it? We're going to turn it into a checklist. And what is it that you're trying to do? So then we can make a checklist and say, okay, this is the kinds of things, and this is what we need, the services we need you to have. The data set catalog, which, initially, so started out as we were really focused on our enterprise data sets, just making sure people knew about them. But we went to talk to a researcher about the Cancer Center registry, and he immediately was like, he has a registry around breast cancer that he maintains himself, and he's like, oh, this is wonderful. I'll have a place I can put this, and I'll be able to find collaborators because they'll now, we can send them to that catalog. And then information management glossary, to have a place where we can start tracking our metrics and our definitions and those kinds of things. We came up with a proposed timeline that if they were going to invest all of the money in this, when certain projects might start because of dependencies. We have a roadmap of every one of those projects broken down into what their key activities are, implementation considerations, deliverables, the use cases, domains that it serves, and the key benefits. This was just for technology assessment and rationalization, how long it would take and what kinds of things would happen. And so we get to costs. So when we started looking at costs, one of the things we did was look at, well, what are we spending currently? And so what we did was go out, and we knew we were never going to get our fingers exactly on the number, but we wanted to get a minimal number. So we looked at, for an enterprise group, like MSIS or MCIT or Fast Analytics, which is Jonathan Greenberg's group, or the clinical trial office that does services for researchers, if somebody's job is 50% or more of analytics, let's just include their salary in this. And when we did that, we came up with, across the health system, there's 292 employees for about $38 million. And we wanted to do this because we wanted people to sort of understand, the scale that we're talking at. So when we come out with these big, huge $1 million numbers, it's not going to scare them as much as, because we already are spending $40 million a year. And this is a minimal number. We know we're spending even more. This wasn't a great picture. We've never been able to quite explain how, we're spending this current money, and if we don't get a handle on this, it's going to continue. The orange is how it will have all these additional costs because all the current work will continue on. We'll have all this new work, and nobody's going to be rationalizing anything. We're going to have duplicative effort. But if we really pay attention to this, we should be able to actually reduce the amount of effort we're spending on existing efforts and have more money to spend on new projects without really raising our footprint. This is blanked out because, not because we're particularly scared about it, but like our finance guy is he's nervous because what we came out with was a estimate. It's not a budget. It's a number that Deloitte helped us come up with, and it included external consulting fees that might be encountered. It included people we may need to hire, hardware fees, software fees, And the total was $101 million if we were to do every project that was on this list. And it's an outer bound number because we didn't look at, well, could we use existing people for some of those efforts? And also these projects are done at a high level. We still would need to, anything that got kicked off would need to have the detail done and a new, an actual number and budget derived for it. But this has been useful. Deloitte had actually, this is one thing, that they had this phenomenal spreadsheet, which for every project had, the only thing, of course, is they created one big number for professional services, which we had them go back and at least tell us what was in some of those, that dollar amount, like what kind of people they were thinking about. But we can easily sort of move things around, so as we look at how we might approach this, we can have some better ideas about how much money we might be trying to spend. So in summation, this was what we considered to be phase 0, which was creating the roadmap. And if we were going to execute on it, typically you'd want to provide the data discoverability services, which then enable data exploration, which then enables some more use case driven projects. And the benefit to the UMHS is we'd be able to deliver on all of these areas. And these are the types of things that we'd be able to provide. So the right people would have access to the right information and the right tools at the right time. So you hear a lot of those right statements. And by doing this, we'll foster innovation, increase collaboration, inform decision making, drive better planning, and enable cost-effective administration. So where are we at? We had a lot of leadership changes. We have a new EVPMA that just started. So the intent had been to present this to the EVPMA in January, but because it was an interim EVPMA that was in charge of the group, they decided it would not be good because he really had been told he couldn't make any decisions. So we held off and waited for Dr. Runge, who's our new EVPMA, to come into town. And during this time, we've been going out and socializing the roadmap with like department chairs, some of the cancer, the center and institute leadership, meeting with the CFO, so that they all understand, have a better idea of what the dollars are, what it meant, what the projects are. We've created executive sponsors for each of those big categories. So we have an executive sponsor for the clinical analytics. We have an executive sponsor for research. And making sure that they understand what the projects are that were recommended, that they understand what the value would be if we did those projects. We got asked to sort of explain what would be the value to the institution if we did all of those things. And we can, for clinical analytics, go, well, in general, we think this is the value, but I can't give like a dollar amount because I'm not in that business. I can, for the IT stuff, give a better idea of what we could deliver. And so we did say, but again, because this was kind of high level, we couldn't make real promises, but we did look out at what some of the other institutions had happened because they did this. And we use those dollars. So for example, if we're going to look at creating a more efficient organization, we should be able to reduce the amount that we're spending on people, software, and licenses by at least 10%. And those were the kinds of things that we were providing to leadership. And as of April 6th, last week, is when they actually met with Dr. Runge and sort of explained to him the roadmap. We'd also, during this time, looked at, well, how could we approach this? Because there's many different ways. Either you just do the whole shebang, that's one way. Not very likely at $101 million. And then, or do we do it the way we sort of said, which was, okay, we'll do all the kind of foundational stuff first, which will enable the more use case driven projects, or do you take a small slice and go all the way through? Pick some use case driven project that we know people really want and deliver the foundational pieces that deliver on that piece. And so we've been coming up with the different dollar amounts for each of those different approaches. And we're kind of waiting, and what was very actually exciting was to hear that so when they went to talk to Dr. Runge, they took the very minimal like if we just do these foundational things, this will be the very minimal that it would cost for the next year, which was around 3.2 million. And then if we're successful, the number would go up the next year. And he said, no, I want to know the whole shebang. I want to understand all of the work that was done, understand all of the value, talk to the executive sponsors. And so that was very heartening. So we for sure know that at a minimum, Dr. Rosenberg and I, in our current positions, will be moving forward on parts of this initiative. But if we can, of course, get additional money, we'll be able to do it much faster. And so that's kind of where things stand. I expect to hear in the next couple months more information, but we are continuing on with things like the dataset catalog, glossary, and some of our other initiatives. We're going to be working with MCIT on a reporting catalog, getting some of their metrics into the glossary, that kind of thing. So, any questions?
Institutions were talked to. So what does the landscape look like for other hospitals, other world-class hospitals like U of M?
Right. Like us, most other institutions are embarking on these kind of enterprise analytics. What we see is where, for example, Moffitt Cancer Center has done a lot around this. They've really focused on getting all of their information into more of an enterprise data warehouse, making sure they have the proper consent so that when they go to reuse that data, they can, so that the accesses, approvals are there, and then they're selling that data. So they're making definite revenue out of this. We talked to like UCSF. They also have a plan that they're putting into place. In some ways, we have more than other institutions because we've had a health system data warehouse for a long time. Other institutions have not had that. So, for example, UCSF is they're on Epic also, and Epic has a sort of a data model called Cogito that you can put into place. It has a business objects universe on it. They're looking at bringing that up and then loading in their education and research data because you can extend that data model. And they're looking at spending about $5 million for the next 4 or 5 years. One of the things is Dr. Rosenberg, when we did this, he said, well, I want to come up with like an 8-year plan. And I said, well, that doesn't make sense because technology changes so much in 8 years that, it's just not going to make any sense. We really need to keep it very limited, no more than 4 years.
And you couldn't do the 2020 vision then.
Yeah, right. So, but we wanted to make sure it was stuff that we could execute on and that people understand that we'll have to be continually revisiting this to build up the plan.
Are you looking at some sort of like public-private collaborative efforts to do some of these things?
Yep. Nope. Definitely.
The question was, are we looking at any public or private collaborative efforts to enable these initiatives? And the answer is that, yeah, absolutely. Wherever it makes sense to do so, that's certainly something that we're open to.
One of the challenges we have on the university side is with what you were calling reference data, I think. So common definitions of what is a student, what is a faculty, is an adjunct, associate, clinical lecturer, faculty or not.
That's self-explanatory. Come on.
So do you see these as being major challenges on the health system side, or do you think the sponsorship is going to help you kind of bowl through those? And what other challenges do you see?
I think we will have challenges obviously around that, and so the glossary would be one place where we start to track those. But then, how do you ensure that information is kept up to date, that it doesn't become stale? How we put in place a plan to keep that maintenance up. There will be challenges. So if I'm a researcher, in some cases I might want to use the cleaned data, and in other cases I actually probably want to get to the real-time data. So for example, a blood pressure, when we clean the data, they take out the outlier blood pressures, figuring there was something wrong with the monitor at the time. But in some cases they want to get to that data. So I mean, we have to be very open to how we support those initiatives. And there will be cases where people need to actually go back to the source, but in other cases where we do want to come to some agreement and provide that clean data for them.
And it all, in my mind, boils down to having decision-making frameworks along which to surface those issues that you're sort of talking about and then move them to resolution. And that's kind of why the data governance framework is so essential to success in this endeavor.
And we have talked with, like Laura Patterson said, oh, well, we have the SPG 60112 or whatever. We have a good definition of data governance at the institution, but their stewards are people like the registrar. And I said, well, I can't take medical education data to the registrar. And she says, well, in that case, it's supposed to be the dean. Well, I'm not going to take some, some issue to the dean unless it's a really important issue. So part of this is this hub and spoke and escalation path so that you can deal with these issues at the very bottom level where you can. And yes, maybe occasionally something will surface to the dean, but that's not the first place we go. So University of Pittsburgh has 200 data stewards. And so I think we will eventually at some point end up there also. But
because there's really a lot of data to be stewarded in the health systems.
And you really want it managed at that lower level. I don't want the dean to be the person we go to talk to. He's got more important things to do.
More about how you plan to manage access to some of these new data sources and tools. Do you anticipate doing something a little different than what you're doing now, or do you have some sort of future plans?
Well, we plan to merge with the Identity and Access Management Initiatives, which are actually part of this. And it's a piece that we know, again, it's one of the sub-projects that's been identified that we have to work through. And, we have to kind of look at what is coming out of the institutional efforts or how much we'll have to try to resolve at the at the health system. But one of the things we'd love to do is create a master person service versus a master provider or a master patient service. Really try to take it up a level.
You talked a lot about data quality. And, do you find that? Does this work? Oh, yeah. Do you find that it's challenging, and at what level do you go back and make sure people are entering data correctly or not? You talked about clinical notes too. That seems like it would be a really difficult thing to pull out for analytics.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So the data quality initiatives are kind of shoot, I had a better answer that's lined up, but data quality is kind of where the process meets the result, right? And that's where we know that when we set our scope to be kind of analytics or secondary use of data, we know that when we're doing analysis of data, we're going to wind up getting back into those processes. And so that's an expected tie-in to the source systems and source processes that we're going to be looking at. And but that's where we really need kind of user guidance and prioritization to sort of say, if our data quality is poor in a certain area, it's important enough for us to have high quality that we're actually going to better govern the process along which the data is created and updated. So that's a very, it's a key point of interaction, essentially, along the chain of data use.
Just kind of a follow-up on that is, do you expect there to be a steep learning curve for people to, is it going to be that drastically of a different system where people might actually have a pretty steep learning curve, though?
It's depending on the area. I mean, you've got certain processes where you have the same people who are using the process or are consuming the data downstream. It probably won't be that big of a change management effort for those. Where you have different populations that are generating or updating data versus consuming it downstream, there I expect there to be more of a change management effort around education and getting people to understand the impact of their data processes, their data creation and updating processes. So I think it depends, like a lot of things.